There's a simple rule that parents teach their children from an early age: stay away from strangers. This rule has many variations, and one of them goes like this: never drink with people you don't know well enough. Even if your friends or acquaintances are nearby, there's always a risk, because no one can predict the intentions of someone who suddenly decides to become part of your group. 22-year-old Tami Engstrom was a young mother of a little boy and a married woman. Despite her family responsibilities, she still enjoyed spending time with close friends, having fun and relaxing. On February 7, 1991, at approximately 5:30 p.m., Tami brought her son Casey to her friend Sharon's house. After leaving the child under her friend's supervision, she planned to go to her work shift, and after finishing it, she intended to meet with her uncle. Tami worked at a place called Barb's Lounge in Hubbard, Ohio, USA. This small town with a population of approximately 7,000 residents was located not far from the border with a neighboring state. Tami's mother, Mary Jane Hayes, also worked at the same establishment. At 6:30 p.m., Tami arrived at work and performed her duties for 3 hours. However, around 9:30 p.m., the young woman felt unwell. She asked her mother to cover for her and finish the rest of the shift on her own, explaining that she wanted to go home because she wasn't feeling well. Mary Jane agreed to help her daughter. But instead of going home, Tami headed to another establishment, the Nickelodeon Lounge bar. This bar was located in Masury, Ohio, just a 10-minute drive from Hubbard. The young woman had prearranged to meet her uncle Dennis Huner there and didn't want to break their plans. Dennis was a regular at the Nickelodeon Lounge, frequently visiting with friends, and sometimes with Tami and Mary. For their family, this place had become something of a favorite meeting spot. At 10 p.m., Tami arrived at the bar. She found her uncle. They started talking and ordered quite a few alcoholic drinks. Around 11 p.m., one of Dennis's acquaintances joined their table, a man named Kenneth Biros. Although he and Dennis had drunk together several times at this bar, they weren't close friends. As for Tami, this was her first time meeting Kenneth. The trio continued drinking, and around midnight, Tami's condition deteriorated so much that she could no longer stand firmly on her feet. According to witnesses, the young woman even fell off her chair onto the floor. The men helped her up, but Dennis decided not to serve his niece any more alcohol, though he continued drinking himself. The entire group stayed at the bar practically until closing time. Only around 1 a.m. did Kenneth and Tami start getting ready to go home. The young woman had sobered up a bit and insisted she could drive her car, but her uncle categorically opposed this. Despite his warnings, Tami still tried to start her car, which forced Dennis to take her keys away. He himself was also intoxicated, though he lived nearby. Of the entire group, Kenneth appeared to be the least drunk, so he offered to drive Tami to her home in his car. Before leaving, they drank some strong coffee with her, hoping it would help the young woman sober up. At 1:15 a.m., Kenneth helped Tami get into his car. Despite the coffee she'd drunk, the woman didn't feel better and almost immediately fell asleep. Kenneth assured Dennis that he would deliver her home safely, and drove off. Dennis meanwhile ran into another acquaintance and went home with him. At this time, Tami's husband, Andy, had already returned from work and was waiting for his wife at home. They had married on December 9, 1988, after a long relationship. The husband had no idea that his wife had gone drinking with her uncle at a bar. When it was 11:30 p.m., Andy began to worry and decided to look for his wife. First, he drove to Barb's Lounge where Tami worked. The man planned to meet her after her shift and find out the reason for the delay. He also brought a gift he wanted to give her for a small anniversary of their relationship. Instead of a tired Tami after work, Andy met her mother. Mary Jane was surprised by his appearance and told him that her daughter had gone home several hours ago due to feeling unwell. According to her, Tami should have been home long ago. Andy felt something had gone wrong, but didn't panic immediately. He assumed his wife might have gone to their child. Knowing about the friend who regularly watched their son, he went to Sharon's, hoping to find his wife there, who might have been delayed picking up the boy. But Tami wasn't at Sharon's either. Instead, the friend told him that the young woman hadn't planned to go home, but was going to visit the Nickelodeon Lounge bar to meet with her uncle. According to Sharon, Tami had intended to pick up their son no earlier than 1 a.m. By that point it was already late, and even Sharon began to worry about Tami's lateness, as punctuality was one of her traits. Andy decided not to waste time driving between towns and bars. He simply called the Nickelodeon Lounge. There he was told that Tami, along with the entire group she'd been spending the evening with, had recently left the establishment. Hearing this, Andy calmed down. He thought they had simply missed each other while he was driving to get their son, and his wife was already waiting for him at home. The man picked up the child from Sharon's and headed home. Arriving home with his son, Andy was surprised not to find his wife there. However, fatigue took its toll, and he decided to go to bed, thinking that Tami might have been delayed somewhere, perhaps stayed overnight at her uncle's, and would return soon on her own. Waking up in the morning, Andy first looked at the other side of the bed. His wife wasn't there. He walked through the entire house, making sure she hadn't appeared. At this moment, his irritation and hurt gave way to real fear. He couldn't understand where his wife was. Although it was common for Tami to spend time over drinks with her uncle or other relatives and friends, the fact that she hadn't returned by morning was completely unlike her. Moreover, she hadn't gone to get their son, hadn't shown up at her friends'. Despite her youth and love of fun, everyone who knew Tami considered her a caring and devoted mother who would never abandon her child. The husband began calling friends and acquaintances, but no one could tell him Tami's whereabouts. During the day, Andy's friend came to visit, and together they decided to drive to the Nickelodeon Lounge bar to find out more about the previous night's events. In the establishment's parking lot, Andy saw his wife's car, after which he managed to contact her uncle. Dennis told him in detail about what had happened the previous night and gave him the keys to Tami's car. Andy was irritated that his young wife had been driven home by some man he didn't know, but he tried to control his emotions. Before finding out the details, he decided to retrieve his wife's car. Meanwhile, Andy learned Kenneth's address and decided to talk to this man personally. He hoped that Tami had simply drunk too much and couldn't make it home, so she had spent the night at his place. During the meeting with Kenneth, the man confirmed that the previous evening the woman had indeed drunk too much. According to him, he tried to help her come to her senses with coffee, but it didn't work, so he decided to drive her home. Tami fell asleep in his car before she could even tell him her home address. Kenneth said that when they approached a railroad crossing, he lightly patted the woman on the shoulder, trying to wake her up. But Tami woke up abruptly and, seeing this place, became so frightened that she jumped out of the car screaming. Despite all his attempts to catch up with the woman, he couldn't. From that moment, the man insisted he hadn't seen her again. According to Kenneth's description, this all happened less than a mile from the Nickelodeon Lounge bar. Andy had exhausted all possibilities for independently searching for Tami, and he was overcome with strong concern. Therefore, he decided to contact law enforcement and filed an official missing person report for his wife. Andy didn't trust Kenneth's story, he was filled with strong displeasure, and he was convinced this man was lying. After filing a report at the police station, Andy called Kenneth again. In the conversation, he warned that if his wife didn't appear soon, law enforcement would come after him. In response, Kenneth continued to insist on his version. Tami had left his car on her own and disappeared, and he had no idea about her current whereabouts. Initially, law enforcement representatives weren't particularly enthusiastic about this case. They advised the husband to wait at least 24 hours to give the woman a chance to come home on her own. In their opinion, she might simply be resting after the party at someone's place. When this period passed, police officers began search efforts for the young mother. Since Kenneth was the last to have contact with her, his person aroused increased interest. However, they spoke not only with him but also with other witnesses. Investigators noticed that throughout Friday, Kenneth told different people an identical version about how Tami had left his vehicle. Several people noted that his story didn't inspire trust, which led to the thought, perhaps this way Kenneth was trying to avoid responsibility and create an alibi for himself. Not only was Kenneth's version suspicious, but also the injuries noticed on him, which Andy had also immediately seen. His face had visible deep recent scratches, and his hand had a long cut mark. Analyzing witness testimony, investigators noticed that Kenneth's version was gradually transforming, as if in his stories the man was trying to distance himself more and more from Tami. Explaining the origin of his injuries to Andy, Kenneth claimed he couldn't enter his own home after visiting the bar. According to him, being heavily intoxicated, he accidentally damaged a window and then injured himself trying to open the door. In another situation, he explained the scratches on his face by saying he had been chopping wood at night. However, this version looked even less plausible. What need was there to split wood in the dark after drinking alcohol? His inconsistent explanations provoked strong outrage from Tami's relatives. The missing woman's brother intervened in the situation, coming to Kenneth with threats to rip his heart out if something had happened to his sister because of him. Later, the missing woman's mother joined these threats, as well as her uncle and husband. The hostility toward him didn't go unnoticed. Law enforcement representatives decided to study this person more closely, first by looking into his past. Kenneth was born on June 24, 1958. His childhood years were difficult because of his father, a domineering and ruthless person. The head of the family viewed his wife and children as his property, causing all of them to suffer. The father showed excessive jealousy toward his wife while showing almost no paternal affection for the children. He was focused exclusively on completely controlling his wife. He systematically used physical violence against his wife and constantly suspected her of infidelity, although she never gave grounds for such suspicions. The man was prone to manipulation and cruelty, constantly oscillating between threats to end his life and threats to destroy his wife along with the children. The turning point in the family's fate came with the father's death from liver disease in October 1983. This finally allowed them to free themselves from the domestic despot's oppression. All of Biros's relatives characterized Kenneth as an attentive and caring person. He graduated from college where he studied criminology and strived to achieve success in life. However, from his youth he had incidents with law enforcement. The young man was involved in a high-profile criminal case in April 1977. But ultimately they concluded there was insufficient evidence against him. Later, in 1986, he was arrested for driving under the influence. He pleaded guilty, which allowed him to receive a relatively light sentence. Despite the traumatic experience associated with his father's tyranny and death, he gave the impression of being a completely adequate, sociable person. At the time of Tami's disappearance, he lived with his mother. On the morning of February 8, 1991, the day after Tami's disappearance, Kenneth's mother found a gold wedding ring on the bathroom floor. The woman didn't understand whose property it was. Since her son didn't have a steady relationship at that time, she asked him about the origin of the jewelry. He took the ring, claiming he didn't know its owner. At first, the mother didn't pay special attention to this. But later, when rumors spread through town about Kenneth's possible involvement in Tami's disappearance, the woman thought about it and assumed the ring might be connected to the missing woman. When Kenneth took the jewelry, he said he planned to take it to the bar where the group had been the night before. However, as it turned out later, he didn't take the jewelry to the establishment. On Saturday morning, February 9, 1991, Tami's friends and relatives began intensive search efforts. They were guided by the information provided by Kenneth, so they most thoroughly examined the area where she allegedly left his vehicle, the railroad tracks at the crossing and the adjacent area. At first, nothing important was found. Notably, the suspected Kenneth himself participated in these search efforts. Of course, the operation was coordinated by law enforcement representatives. One of the police officers who was conducting interviews and collecting testimony noticed that Kenneth showed strong agitation when questioned about the details of the woman's disappearance. Together with his colleague, they focused more attention on Kenneth. During the conversation, the officers suggested that perhaps he had made an indecent proposal to Tami, which frightened her and made her leave the car. However, the man categorically denied this. The police representatives persistently and repeatedly put forward different scenarios of how events developed. But essentially they were just formulating the same situation in different ways. They assumed Kenneth might have made an indecent proposal or started harassing the woman. Leaving the car, Tami injured her head, and something bad happened to her. Despite vigorous denials, Kenneth eventually unexpectedly changed his version, confirming that everything happened exactly that way. This inconsistency became the first serious alarm signal. After this, investigators decided to have a more thorough conversation with the suspect. One of the police officers used a tactical technique. He took the man aside for a private one-on-one conversation. The officer created a trusting atmosphere, hoping to encourage him to be honest. During this conversation, Kenneth admitted that during the ride with Tami, he touched her leg. At that moment, the woman pushed his hand away and got scared. She opened the door, even though the vehicle was still moving, and jumped out. According to Kenneth, this happened exactly when they were crossing the railroad crossing. When Tami fell, she hit her head hard on the railroad tracks. At first, he continued to claim that after this the woman ran away. But as the conversation continued, more and more new details emerged. Kenneth described in detail the location where this happened. From his words, it followed that the episode of jumping from the vehicle occurred less than a kilometer from his residence. There were too many suspicions about Kenneth, so he was taken to the station for official questioning. During the conversation at the station, when he talked about Tami, it seemed that Kenneth was speaking about the woman in the past tense. As if she was no longer among the living. The moment when Kenneth realized he was suspected in a case involving the woman's death became a turning point. Detectives were already considering the version of Tami's death, and he immediately sought help from a lawyer. However, the man didn't refuse to talk with law enforcement. Moreover, after consulting with the lawyer, he agreed to lead investigators to where Tami was. A strange detail was exactly how Kenneth spoke about the location of the body. He used the plural, as if talking about several locations at once. Investigators took this as an ordinary linguistic error, not attaching special significance to such phrasing. The real reason for this expression was revealed later. The dawn of Sunday, February 10, 1991, brought a terrible discovery. Pennsylvania and Ohio law enforcement, working together, came across the remains of a young woman in a remote forest area of Butler County in Pennsylvania. First, the head and right half of the torso were found. Later they found the right limb, separated just above the knee joint, as well as another part of the torso. The victim wasn't just dismembered, the internal organs had been removed. The reproductive organs were completely removed, and they remained unfound throughout the entire investigation. There was no clothing on the body except what appeared to be the remains of black pantyhose pulled down to the ankles. Examination of the area where, according to Kenneth, Tami had jumped from the car revealed a long section of railroad track covered with blood traces. Several of the victim's internal organs and elements of her wardrobe were found at the scene. Having obtained a warrant, investigators conducted a search of Kenneth's residence. In the bathroom, they found a hidden knife with traces of blood. In the personal bedroom, they found another blade, also stained with blood. There they also found items of clothing that Dennis, the deceased's uncle, had previously described. The clothes were soaked with blood. Laboratory analysis confirmed the blood belonged to both Kenneth and the victim. In the attic, they found the hidden ring, the same one Kenneth's mother had earlier noticed in the bathroom. The jewelry belonged to the murdered Tami. Even the suspect's vehicle contained evidence. A small fragment of liver tissue was found in the trunk. When the scattered remains reached the medical examiner, the expert quickly established the cause of death: asphyxiation. The hyoid bone was found to be fractured. Additionally, 5 antemortem knife wounds were recorded on the body. Postmortem injuries were even more numerous. The expert counted 91 injuries inflicted after death, including the removal of reproductive organs. This picture in no way corresponded to the version about an accidental fall from a vehicle. Under the weight of irrefutable facts, Kenneth admitted his involvement in the brutal murder. His story changed repeatedly in details. The only thing that remained unchanged, he claimed he couldn't remember what happened to the victim's excised organs. Investigators assumed this wasn't accidental. Perhaps this way he was trying to hide the fact of sexual assault or other similar acts. Preparation for the trial began. Kenneth's defender tried to mitigate his guilt by appealing to his difficult childhood and his father's cruel treatment, which negatively affected the defendant's mental state. Kenneth was charged with sexual assault, premeditated murder with aggravating circumstances, and first-degree robbery. The lawyer continued to advocate for the need to mitigate the sentence. To justify insanity, a psychiatric examination was conducted. Experts diagnosed the defendant with schizoid personality disorder, neurotic depression, and alcohol dependency. The defense emphasized the absence of previous serious offenses. Throughout his youth and most of his adult life, Kenneth had been a hard-working, unremarkable person, not at all like someone capable of such terrible acts. However, this strategy didn't work. Psychiatric experts who cooperated with the justice system concluded that Kenneth was competent to stand trial and fully aware of his actions. He completely understood the nature and consequences of his actions. The lawyer changed tactics, trying to prove that the fatal outcome was the result of negligence, and all of Kenneth's subsequent actions were done in a state of panic, trying to hide evidence. That's why he dismembered the body, to facilitate disposal. The prosecution emphasized the numerous changes in the defendant's testimony, which indicated attempts to hide the truth. The prosecutor claimed, Tami's death was the result of intentional brutal murder, the purpose of which was to hide the fact of sexual assault. The defense continued to advocate the last version voiced by the accused. According to him, Tami was in a state of severe alcohol intoxication and couldn't even give her address. So Kenneth decided to take her to his place so the woman could sober up, and in the morning deliver her home. At the railroad crossing, the man again tried to wake her up and find out her home address. Tami woke up from the touch, started screaming and trying to jump out of the car. Falling outside, she hit her head, which angered her even more, probably due to the severe pain from the blow. Kenneth stopped the car and got out. Seeing Tami's serious injuries, he wanted to help. The woman was conscious, but instead of accepting help, she continued screaming, cursing and trying to run away, even started throwing stones. Kenneth didn't want to let her go in such a state, so he caught up with her, but she started fighting, hitting him several times in the face and leaving scratches. The woman screamed about her intention to go to the police with a complaint about harassment. Kenneth assured her that nothing like that had happened, he was just trying to wake her up. At that moment, the man realized, if she filed a complaint, he could have serious problems with the law. Unable to withstand such inadequate behavior, he decided to calm Tami down at any cost. To frighten her and stop the hysteria, he pulled out a knife and started threatening. Instead of calming down, Tami began resisting even more actively. During the struggle, Kenneth injured his hand, after which he lost control of his anger. He hit the woman, knocked her to the ground, clamped his hand over her mouth with all his strength and held it for several minutes. When Kenneth calmed down and removed his hand, the woman was no longer breathing. Frightened, he decided to dispose of the body. Despite the fact that this version was the last and was supported by the lawyers, the medical examiner refuted it. A fracture of the hyoid bone couldn't occur from accidental suffocation by covering the mouth with a hand. Such an injury is possible only with intentional throat compression with extremely great force. Moreover, Kenneth's explanation didn't answer for the 91 post-mortem injuries on the victim's body. All this didn't correspond to the version of an accident that the defense insisted on. The prosecution claimed, Tami died as a result of premeditated murder with particular cruelty. Obviously, the defendant enjoyed tormenting the defenseless victim. He couldn't stop, enjoying the process, continuing to inflict wounds even after death. According to Kenneth, after the deed he took the body to hide the traces. Arriving home, he planned to bury the victim. But the winter season and frozen ground made digging a deep grave difficult. To make do with a shallow burial, the criminal dismembered the body. During this process, Tami's ring fell in the bathroom, where Kenneth's mother later found it. After dismemberment, he dragged the remains to the nearest forest. He tried to bury the fragments in a shallow pit, but realized the division of the body was insufficient. Large parts didn't fit in the small grave. Then he separated the head, leg, and eviscerated the body. After this, he began hiding the remains in different places. The process lasted all night, after which the killer returned to normal life. The situation changed when Tami's relatives began threatening Kenneth. Very frightened, he dug up the remains that were several hundred meters from the house, loaded them into the car and drove to Pennsylvania. It was only a few miles to the neighboring state. There he decided to hide everything more carefully. Kenneth's story continued to change throughout the investigation and even during the trial. But one fact remained unchanged: the killer insisted he hadn't committed sexual assault and didn't remember the location of the excised sexual organs. The prosecution and Tami's relatives were convinced she had been tortured and intentionally tormented. The jury agreed with this version. The killer was sentenced to the death penalty. While in prison, Kenneth repeatedly violated the regime. In May 1992, he was found with a cardboard tube suitable for use as an improvised weapon, as well as 3 darts made from toilet paper and metal staples. For this, he spent 10 days under enhanced supervision. A month later, a homemade knife made from part of an antenna was found in his cell. In October 1995, during a search, 12 packs of cigarettes were found, which were considered contraband, and other prohibited items. Despite all violations, he and his lawyer continued to hope for an appeal to save the convict's life. On July 5, 2005, at the age of 45, Tami Engstrom died of a heart attack. Everyone who knew the man closely claimed he never recovered from the loss of his beloved wife Tami. At that time, Kenneth Biros continued serving his sentence, working as a food server on death row. He participated in religious services and community work. Many believe that during his years of imprisonment he had become deeply religious and reformed. On October 22, 2009, a meeting with journalists took place. The man continued to claim that Tami's death was an accident, insisting on his innocence and that he didn't deserve the death sentence. The criminal stated his hope for commutation of the sentence to at least life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, to preserve his life. Of course, everyone who loved Tami disagreed with this, especially her mother Mary Jane and son Casey. They most wanted justice, believing that only the death penalty could atone for Kenneth's guilt. Despite all attempts to achieve a review of the case, around noon on December 8, 2009, 51-year-old Kenneth Biros took his last breath. His last meal the night before consisted of cheese pizza, onion rings and fried mushrooms, chips with French onion dip, cherry pie, blueberry ice cream and Dr. Pepper soda. Before the execution, he only drank a glass of water, made a statement about the murder and thanked everyone who had prayed for him. The execution at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville became the first case of using a single-drug lethal injection, a powerful anesthetic. Previously, a cocktail of 3 substances administered sequentially had been used. The lawyer continued to protest against the experiment, but her objections were rejected. The procedure went without complications. Kenneth died within 10 minutes. Tami Engstrom's mother was present at the execution in a wheelchair with an oxygen tank. Despite constant pain from age-related illnesses, she was able to come and witness this event. The woman told press representatives about her satisfaction that justice had finally been achieved. Just 12 days after the execution, Mary Jane died. Among local residents, rumors spread that after all these events, the house where Kenneth lived with his mother became a site of paranormal activity. After some time, the building burned down and was completely destroyed. But even after this, for a long time there were stories about restless souls wandering at the old burned site. Thus this bloody story became part of urban legends. Please write your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. For those who are new here, subscribing is the best way to stay updated on future content. Also give a like please. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for your support during this difficult time. Until next time, friends.